And now in this last lecture about qualitative data, which I find most people intuitively understand observations and detailed notes and interviews and surveys. We don't have to have a lot of specialized training to understand these. I want you to know that you do have to have a lot of training to be really good at these techniques. It's not fluffy and easily acquired. It's incredibly difficult work to be really, really good at this. But in this last lecture, I want to talk to you about interviews. Interviews are really widely used in qualitative studies. Most qualitative studies are a matter of observations or interviews of some kind. So when we talk about qualitative research, we're describing extensive and in-depth interviews, not like a 20-minute job interview. Depending on the study design, I may be interviewing to learn about shared experiences for an ethnography, or I may be asking questions to better understand a person's perspective and experience in a particular situation. In all cases, I'm trying to get at the participants' current perceptions. Sometimes I'm trying to get their predictions or their projections about what's going to happen next or why they think that will happen. I'm sometimes trying to verify or extend the information I've observed. And I really find that one of the most valuable parts of interviews if they're conducted after an observation, because it gives me a chance to clarify what I observed and find out if I'm on the right track for what I may be thinking of as an explanation for that. And I can ask for clarification about the participants' interpretation of the situation. So it's really about them, not necessarily about my take on it. Interviews can be of different kinds. There's very informal interviews, which are almost like a conversation, and the questions just kind of emerge and flow in this give and take as I ask the questions. And this usually happens with the participants that are being observed. Now, I can also take the role, though, where I'm kind of guiding it. I'm the interviewer guide, and I plan ahead the topics that I want to be sure and hit, and then I sequence and word those in a certain order, although I let it be a little bit flexible as I'm going along. This is the kind I'm most comfortable with. I really struggle if I were to just go in and interview somebody for a purpose. I'm afraid my mind would go blank. I really need a guide or the topics or the big pieces that I at least want to hit. But some interviewers are just incredible at doing the informal conversational, like that just isn't one of my fortes. And then there can be very standardized interviews. Usually these are done when there's a group of interviewers and they're going out and they're interviewing a lot of people. So it's really important that we all hit the same topics and ask the same kind of questions. And those don't have as much flexibility. The interviewer becomes more of a recorder of the situation. There are also some specific kinds of interviews. Um, when you interview a key informant, you're trying to get at the specific knowledge or status or skills that that are not accessible through observation. You're trying to get at some key information that this person might have about the situation. So, for example, before or after observing a classroom, it would be really important to interview the teacher for his perspective. He's going to be the key informant for the situation. Sometimes I'm interviewing because I need the background or historical perspective on what led up to the current situation. And this is called a career or a life history type of interview. Principal's description, for example, of their teaching career can provide amazing information about how they, in turn, observe teachers or lead their staff. So I would want to get at their history and what their experiences were in the past. Now, an elite interview would be when there's a person or some kind of gatekeeper who plays some kind of influential role and has shaped it. A little bit like a key informant, but a little bit different. This person would have access to information that other people do not have. A key informant, there may be more than one, or there may be different perspectives on it. But when you're doing an interview of an elite, or an elite interview, that person is really the one who would have that background. So, for example, suppose I want to study the use of a particular textbook or program in a reading classroom. It might be really valuable to go back and interview the administrator who was responsible for choosing and purchasing that program, because they would have key information that no one else would really have. They were the person who kind of shaped that situation in some way. Finally, if I want to try describing a very specific situation or event, I need to get the experiences of those who lived it. So, for example, if I wanted to know what happened in classrooms during a shattering national experience, such as the destruction of the Twin Towers on 9/11, I want to interview those who were sitting in classrooms when this happened, when this event happened. So I want to get as many perspectives as possible. As I said before, even in a very informal interview, I would want to have a general sense of the kind of questions I want to ask. Obviously, you want to find out about the experiences of the behaviors and how the person perceived them. And an interview is the perfect way to ask about a person's beliefs, their opinions or values, as well as their feelings or even the sensory experience that the person was having. Questions like these, which get very personal and could be intrusive, do not work unless the researcher has established a rapport, built trust, and has permission from the participant for personal kinds of questions. Many of us put up personal barriers, and it's difficult to get through those without a relationship. And that's probably one of the toughest things about doing interviews, especially if you do only one interview with a person after an observation. They may feel defensive a little bit about what you might have seen during that observation, and feel a need to justify everything that happened rather than just explain it or give their feelings. And that is one of the toughest things to do with qualitative research. The sequence of your questions in an interview actually makes quite a difference. It's really common to open with some relaxed, non-threatening kinds of questions. I'll give you a really bad example. To sit down with a single working mother and just out of the blue start out with, "Why did you start having children at 16?" That's not going to lead to a very productive interview. Usually, we start with reminding the participant about the purpose of the interview, maybe explaining a little bit about why you're there, and then slowly move towards more personal questions as the comfort grows. Controversial questions should kind of be towards the middle. You don't want to end the interview with really strong feelings one way or the other. So it's really good to plan some less threatening and less personal questions towards the end to back out. You may have to come back and interview this person, so you want to leave on a kind of a more relaxed note. A researcher's style for interviews is very, very personal. It's individual and it's unique. And the style that you present actually depends on a number of factors. You need to consider how long this interview is going to last. Although nothing is more off putting than right up at the beginning, "I've got 10 minutes." That really lets the participant know you don't value the interview. So you have to look at the age and your relationship, the time of day, and whether you're going to come back and interview multiple times or if it's just this one shot that you've got with access to the person. Young children are especially difficult to interview, and they're very easily distracted. So you wouldn't want to have an interview with a child going very long. You have to consider the number of people who are going to be in the interview. When you get too many in there, it becomes a focus group, really. But you can interview multiple people at the same time, especially if there's a relationship that matters there. For example, husband and wife or spouses, you may want to interview them together for some reason. You also have to consider the setting. It needs to be relaxed. I've found that it doesn't work well to have a table or a desk in between you. You need to if you're going to interview somebody, if you can sit on the same side of the table and make eye contact or some kind of situation like that, conversation setting, a couple of chairs facing each other, but not so artificial that the person is uncomfortable. Um, if you can, the teacher's classroom, they tend to feel very safe there, as opposed to like pulling them into the principal's conference room or something like that. And then you have to look at your communication style and decide how that's going to be. And that goes back a bit to being prepared with questions and putting an order to the questions. When a researcher is doing an interview, they need to be taking notes, even if the interview is being recorded. There are so many nonverbal or body language kind of cues that come through, and you can capture those in your notes. It also gives you a chance to jot down a question you may want to ask later without interrupting the flow, so that you can pay attention to what the person's saying and doing as opposed to trying to remember what you wanted to ask next. And that really helps. After the interview, you must get the interview transcribed. This is tedious, time consuming work, but it's the only way you can do it, and then code your interview and pull the pieces out that you need. You want a verbatim transcript, and that becomes your actual artifact and document. It can't be sloppy, it can't be piecemeal. It is just a chore kind of thing that you must do. And finally, again, after an interview, like after an observation, the researcher should plan for a reflection or elaboration time, a time when the researcher can give their perceptions, their perspectives, their impressions, their thoughts, their questions, so that this gets captured. That is just as important as capturing body language during the interview. Now, here's some do's and don'ts, finally, with interviews, and these kind of summarize what I've been talking about. Um, when you're interviewing someone, you know how you've heard about wait time in a classroom when you ask a question? Wait time in an interview is really, really important. And you have to get a sense of whether the person's really done answering the question, or if they just need a little bit of time to process, or if they're going to elaborate a little bit more, and be very flexible in that, or you will miss some really rich information. You have to establish trust, maintain eye contact. Let that person be the focus of your attention while you're in that interview. There is nothing else as important as that interview while you're in the middle of it. Field test your questions beforehand. Bounce them across a lot of people. Find which ones tick the wrong boxes, or stump a person, or look at their body language. Do all of that ahead of time. And don't hesitate to ask for clarification. You may think you know what the person means, but repeating it back or asking for clarification, ask for an example, or how did you feel about that? Some of those kinds of questions will pull more information on. Be really careful. I've seen interviews where students, especially students as they're starting to do qualitative research, the questions are a bunch of yeses or nos. That is not an interview. That's not going to get you any kind of valuable information. Don't use leading questions where the person is trying to guess what you want as an answer from them, especially if you may be seen as a bit of an authority, like when you're interviewing children. They're going to want to be pleasing you or answer a way that you want. Or some children may be trying to shock you and see if they can get a rise out of you. So be really careful with leading questions. Don't use why questions. Why did you do that? Why did that happen? It makes the person start to feel like they're being interrogated somehow. Twist the questions around to what happened next, or how did that come about? What were the events that led up to that? They're all still why questions. You're getting at the person's explanation of it. but you don't want them to feel like you're just tearing into them and interrogating them. Don't make assumptions about what they mean. Give the person time to elaborate. And then, as I said, don't act distracted or rushed. Take your time. This interview is the most important thing in the world right at the moment.